Connor Imes. I'm one of the broadcasters here at Scarlet and Gray Sports Radio, and welcome to the Block O Show presented by Barrio Tacos. As my broadcast partner Zachary Rodier and I preview the WCHA Final Faceoff as the Buckeyes head up to Minneapolis, Minnesota for the weekend.
Let's now get into this week's focus here on 614 Check as we welcome Connor Imes, my broadcast partner, who is going to be traveling with me to Minnesota this weekend as the Ohio State Buckeyes move on to beat the Bemidji State Beavers at OSU Ice Rink, and they will go to the final face-off at Ritter Arena in Minnesota. It will be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on scarletandgraysportsradio.com, and then the second day on Saturday, if the Buckeyes move forward, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as well on scarletandgraysportsradio.com. So, Connor, thank you so much for coming on today.
Of course, doing great today. Got done with lunch, so just telling you, how are you doing today, Zach?
I am doing good, and it's been a busy few weeks, especially with the playoffs coming into the minds of everyone, especially Buckeye fans and us as broadcasters. So it's been a busy few weeks, but it's a fun few weeks, especially as we get to go to Minnesota this week, and I'm looking forward to taking the trip with you.
Of course, yeah. It was been thinking about it all week. I'm like, it's interesting for me because it'll be the first time I've gone on a trip without any family whatsoever. So it's just the first thing for me, and it's exciting to get to go with you up to Minnesota for, such a big event in the final face-off like this.
Absolutely. And last year it was a great time, and WCHA did an amazing job as they always do. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it all will turn out. So let's get into the games. Before we get to the final face-off, let's talk about the Buckeyes and what they did this week. And that was their sweep over the Bemidji State Beavers, a 4-1 victory, and then it was a 2-1 victory for the Buckeyes on Friday and Saturday. So let's first get your overall thoughts on the Friday game. It was a big game for Sophie Jakes. She got a natural hat trick, the first 3 goals, and then an empty netter from the Buckeyes gave it 4. But this was a game where the Buckeyes heavily outplayed the Beavers. It was Hannah Hoganson, the goaltender for the Beavers, who did a fantastic job in this game to really help the Beavers stay within this one. But it was domination from the Buckeyes.
Yeah, it was one thing I noticed, especially with how well you were seeing Hannah Hoganson play. There was a whole plethora of saves, chances Buckeyes had left and right, especially right at the end of that second period. That's one jumps up to me, where she's making pretty saves. We're even seeing Vandalese clearing pucks off the line behind Hoganson when shots get past her. But Buckeyes just couldn't get anything past until, even that last 0.2 of a second it took for Sophie Jakes to finally break that tie that we saw for so long, it felt like, in that game since the Bemidji State's first goal of the game, and only one of 2 goals they scored in the series overall. You're seeing things like it felt like every player the Buckeyes had was getting involved. You're seeing multiple shifts from the Buckeyes where they're in the same offensive possession and they're able to get through multiple lines, putting chances on. They just could not get, it just felt like they couldn't get much past Hoganson at all. And that was a big testament to how well she played in that game and over that series in general.
The Buckeyes were doing everything right, and it was just Hoganson who was standing on her head there. But someone that really stood out, of course, was Sophie Jakes, who hadn't had a few goal here and there from the past few games, had a natural hat trick in this game. What does it say to her about her skill and her skill level going into the playoffs, getting that natural hat trick? And we all remember last year when she got that overtime winner for the final faceoff. It just seems like she's in a different gear come playoff time now.
Yeah, she's a special player, especially I can imagine all of the Buckeyes franchise and fans are very glad to have her on that team. Especially in those big moments as you're talking about, as we've talked about before, it's like she's a different player when the postseason hits. Playoff Sophie is a special player. It's a very dangerous player to play against because she can make great things happen for that Buckeyes team. And you expect that she's going to really need to do that, playing against some really good teams first in Duluth, and if the Buckeyes can win either Wisconsin or Minnesota next.
And so that was the tale of the first game, the 4-1 victory for the Buckeyes over Bemidji State on Friday, the game that we called together. It was a very different tale, though, Connor, in that second game where the Buckeyes won 2-1. It was a much tighter affair. You could really tell that the Beavers were playing with their season on the line. Frankly, they played a really good game. That's the way you want to end your season, knowing that you put everything out there on the line. And I definitely think the Beavers did that. For the Buckeyes side, they still produced well. They got, the things that they wanted. They created chaos in front. But then ultimately, it was Brooke Bink who did not play in this game after she left the game on Friday, and then Jenna Buglioni left in the first period early in this game from an injury as well. And we, of course, don't know what's going to happen with them in the future. But this was a very different game and showed a different side of this Buckeyes team to just be relentless, keep going through, and ultimately it was Sloan Matthews who got the first goal, and then Jen Gardner.
Yeah, talking about that first goal from Sloan Matthews, it's the same situation to how the first game went, where the Buckeyes were able to score within basically 2 minutes. They scored right at 2 minutes in the second game, scored like 74 seconds into the first, where they're able to get this early goal, and then they just could not get anything. It felt like for forever for the rest of the game until that Gardner goal much later in the game. And it's the same thing before Hoganson holding strong. But this Buckeyes team, with trying to fill in with Buglioni leaving early, filling in with a player like Emerson Jarvis, freshman hasn't seen a whole lot of ice time. You're seeing that younger talent, getting that ice time, getting more experience. Saw the goal from Sloan Matthews. This freshman unit from the Buckeyes is really stepping up and working with some more of those veteran players in, like we were talking about with Sophie Jakes, or on that second line with Jarvis in Rosendahl and Gardner. That veteran plus slightly less experience but upcoming prospect talent has worked very well for these Buckeyes throughout this entire year.
And I thought Emerson Jarvis played a really good game. She actually is a very similar player in my eyes to Buglioni, using that speed and the grittiness, trying to get in front of the net like that. I thought she did a really good job in this game. And head coach Nadine Muzzerall said it's the opportunity that she has as well. Getting put in this chance right around playoff time is something that really would motivate a player like her. And of course, we don't know how the lines are going to look like coming into Minnesota. But if Jarvis does in fact play for this Buckeyes team, I think that the Buckeyes are still in good hands, and she will be able to step up. I really like the third line as well. We talked to Coach Muzzerall about that after the game, and it was a little different with Brooke Bink being out, but you had Kenzie Hosworth and Sloan Matthews along with Sophie Lundeen. That line seemed to be doing really well. But one thing that I think was really important, what you were saying, is the fact that they were scoring so quickly at the beginning of the game, setting the tone, and ultimately they got it done in front of their fans. They swept the Beavers, but
Barrio Tacos is now open right in the heart of Ohio State's campus at 15th Avenue and High Street. Barrio Tacos is now serving tacos and margs late night every night and has an incredible happy hour with half-off margs and dollar-off tacos every weekday from 3 to 6 p.m. Don't forget Barrio Tacos also accepts Buck ID and is offering to-go and DoorDash options. You can also catch Barrio Tacos at their taco truck Monday through Friday, parked right outside the RPAC.
moving now into the final faceoff, as they will play the UMD Bulldogs in the first game. It will be the national championship rematch in the first round of the final faceoff. You can't get a better matchup than that, Connor, in the first round. How important will that first scoring be and setting the tone really early in the game, which will be a neutral site?
Think about this. UMD is going to want revenge. Ohio State beating them in that national championship, and then especially we saw at the beginning of this year, beating them in overtime in Columbus on the day that they were thinking they were going to get revenge right at the start of the season. Buckeyes getting that. Of course, Duluth got victory in overtime against the Buckeyes at home later in the season, right around the beginning of December, before that, right as the Buckeyes were starting their long away trip. So getting an early goal either side is a big momentum thing, and especially with Buckeyes getting 2 early goals in the Bemidji State series. That was not the case for Minnesota Duluth. In that first game, they only scored, the only goal in that game came with only just 2 minutes left in the game versus the Buckeyes scoring 2 minutes into the game. So if Duluth can get a goal early against the Buckeyes, that is a way to set the pace of the game. We saw when the Buckeyes played Wisconsin up in Madison at the end of the year, they put up 4 goals early in the first period. And even though the Buckeyes came back to tie the game, that just wasn't enough to get them to win that one. And you can imagine for the Buckeyes that they would hate to be down early, because if you can avoid it, you would not want to be in a situation where you're down early, because it means you have to try to come back. It means you have to keep pushing even harder, knowing that you can't let off the gas at any point, because you have to keep the gas pressed down to get back from being down a goal already.
And let's talk about the Bulldogs just for a second before we get to the other keys that the Buckeyes need. They played St. Cloud State in their series, sweeping them. I think a lot of people, including myself, thought it was going to be a very tight series that was going to go to 3 games. And the first game was really tight, just 1-0. But then the Bulldogs really set the tone in the second one, showing why they deserve to be in the final faceoff. This is a team that is always seeming to be behind the shadows of Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and really want to put their front foot forward and show why they are one of the top teams in the nation. And they have the goaltending that they have 2 fantastic goaltenders back there in the pipes for the Bulldogs. And that's something the Buckeyes, well, they're already used to after playing how Hoganson played this past weekend. They remember the Quinnipiac series last year as well. They faced a lot of amazing goaltenders. They're going to have this in in Minnesota, excuse me, as well. So it's going to be a big thing for the Buckeyes to get those rebounds in front and get those dirty goals, but also try and give a lot of shots to Sophie Jakes, create traffic in front. And one line, Connor, that's been doing that a lot for this Buckeyes team has been this first line of Malte, Levis, and McKenna Webster. They've been doing well ever since Webster came from field hockey to ice hockey this season. How important is that first line going to be for this series?
I think that the first line, even though it doesn't matter what line the Buckeyes have this, they should still feel like they should be able to score. That first line is just so dangerous. We're seeing, I mean, Peyton Levis, with 21 goals in the year, had a brief moment in time where she was the Buckeyes' leading goal scorer before Jakes got that hat trick in the first game against Bemidji. And you were seeing, there was a point in time where she had something like 8 goals over 5 games. It was incredible. Her scoring pace is incredible. We're seeing Webster, who's arguably been one of the most impressive players on this Buckeyes team, from coming over from Wisconsin last year, playing field hockey for the first part of the season, not being able to really be too much with the team. We saw one game in the, like towards the end of it where she actually played for the Buckeyes still while in field hockey season, but was able to get a game under their belt here. And then as soon as she transitioned full to ice hockey, it felt like she took off flying. She was saying she felt comfortable within a few games of playing on that line. You're seeing she worked up the line. So she didn't start on that first line initially. She worked her way up, and as soon as she got there, we basically didn't see anything move from that Malte, Levis, Webster line, and the chemistry in that line has been incredible, and she's been building and building and building over the season as one line that really hasn't changed since Webster solidified her place in that line.
And that line's going to be key, but I think other things that are going to be really important for this Buckeye team, it's going to be their special teams. Whenever they go on the power play, they're going to have to make it worth it. They're going to have to be very careful to take penalties and be off that penalty kill. And head coach Steve Rollick of the men's hockey team always says that special teams win you the game, but I think that's going to be very key, especially when you have some of the top teams in the nation at the final faceoff. Special teams are going to be really important. Keeping the composure is going to be important as well. But also, you're going to have some media timeouts here and there that can create a different flow of the game. Head coach Nadine Muzzerall always uses every single second of any timeout to talk to her players and settle things down, which I think is going to be very crucial as well. But overall, what do you think the keys, if the Buckeyes want to move on to the final game of the final faceoff, what do they have to do to defeat the University of Minnesota Duluth Bulldogs?
I'm going to stick with what you're talking about with special teams and the fact that they need to mitigate the amount of penalties they take. While their power play may be top in the nation, their penalty kill is about 18th in the nation. And it's not that they really struggle too much in the penalty kill. It's that they don't take a lot of penalties, but when they do take a lot of penalties in a game, we see a lot of times that the team they're playing will score at least one of those chances if they're taking 4, maybe 5 penalties in a game. So if you can mitigate the amount of penalties you're taking or play very well on the penalty kill, as we've seen against teams like St. Thomas Bemidji, they'll basically control play in the opposing team's defensive end for almost the entire power play or for the entire penalty kill, if not attacking themselves through it. If they can control that, and if they can get power play opportunities themselves, as I've said, they are still the best power play in the nation. Didn't show really over the weekend because they didn't get a lot of penalties called their way, but their power play is incredibly dangerous. We see a lot of times where they work basically a 3-man game with Bizzall, Jakes, and Gardner making that triangle formation, getting one-timers and big wrist shots from Gardner and Jakes a lot. If they can get those chances enough, and if they can make them work right, even finding the second unit is just as dangerous because you don't even have players like Levis and Malte on the first line. They're on the second line of power play. The fact that you can have that kind of depth in a team, and that's something Ohio State has plenty of, even the players we don't see play a lot, they could still easily step in given how good some of the players are that are above them and just make that work. And that's what could win it for these Buckeyes.
And before we get into what happens if they play Wisconsin or Minnesota, I think the one more thing that could solidify a victory for the Buckeyes is their finishing instinct. It's something we see all the time. But if they have the lead and the other team wants to pull the goaltender, the Buckeyes always do such a great job hemming the other team in the Buckeyes offensive zone that they don't allow the opposing team to pull the goaltender. And if the Buckeyes can continue to do that, that's something they did fantastically on their national championship run last season. That is going to also be something, Connor, that I think will be really important for their team to be able to make sure that they can try and secure victories. But now let's turn it to the other side. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much because there's still a game that the Buckeyes do have to win. But let's say that the Buckeyes do in fact beat the Bulldogs. They will be playing yet another extremely difficult opponent in either the Minnesota Gophers or, of course, the Wisconsin Badgers that they just saw a few weekends ago. And either way, this is always a fantastic tournament, and I always think the WCHA has the best conference and conference tournament in women's hockey due to the competitiveness of the teams. It's going to be a fantastic game if the Buckeyes do make it and play either opponent. How will the Buckeyes be able to ultimately go back to back for the final faceoff if they do in fact play Minnesota or Wisconsin, who are very different teams from each other and from the Bulldogs, but also still a very difficult opponent?
It goes back to what you just said with basically the winning instinct that the Buckeyes team has. We've seen in games where even if they might just barely be winning in them, they will stay with it. They will play through the final whistle. The one thing they sometimes we've seen struggle, but they do really well with on a lot of times is not getting complacent with their leads. We've seen times like against St. Thomas where they've been up by a bit and then St. Thomas has come back. But in a lot of these games against, I guess you can say, much more difficult opponents, they do very well to play their own game plan the way that they would start the game. They play that same game plan basically throughout the whole game. They will stick with a plan. They're a team that doesn't really change a whole lot. They don't have to. If they can keep with their game plan that they started with it and they can get it to work, they'll stick with that game plan. And if they can get that to work and get out to like an early lead opening, as we were talking about earlier, I think that the Buckeyes will be probably the hardest team to try to come back against if you're down early.
And let's say when we're talking about the different opponents, I think obviously if you're the Buckeyes and you move on to the second game, you have to probably want to play Wisconsin in that second game, just because of the home ice advantage that Minnesota would have with their crowd, right? That can make a huge difference. And if the Buckeyes could keep it to have a neutral site playing Wisconsin instead and not have a lot of Gopher fans, that could also play a big difference as well.
Yeah, I think Ritter Arena is arguably one of the most difficult places to play in women's hockey, especially with the environment when playing against a team like Minnesota, who barely ever loses at home in general. And again, especially as well with the Buckeyes. I mean, in the 4 games they played against Wisconsin, they won 3 of them. In the 4 games they played against Minnesota, they won 1. And of course, it was probably the best team game they played all season was that game against Minnesota. But just you can see how you've played against the teams this year. And it's hard to play in Minnesota. It's hard to play in Raider Arena. It's even harder playing in the playoffs. And it's even harder than that if you're playing in Raider Arena in the playoffs against Minnesota. So, yeah, if you're the Buckeyes, you probably do want to play Wisconsin, but you still do have to focus on getting past the lose first.
Absolutely. And whether they play Wisconsin, Minnesota, they still have to take care of the Bulldogs in the first round of the final faceoff. One thing, we don't want to make crazy predictions, but I think we're at least going to see in one of the games this weekend, whether it's the ones that involve the Buckeyes or not, there's going to be some overtime. I have to feel that way just due to how competitive these teams are, Connor. We all remember how overtime turned out for the Buckeyes last year in the final faceoff. Having that call is something I will not forget, and that a lot of Buckeye fans and the Buckeye players won't either. But either way, I think the Buckeyes will have a good turnout of fans. A lot of their families are from Minnesota. Their parents and families have always done an amazing job turning out here in Columbus every single weekend on the road. A lot of these players will be close to home. So I'm really excited to see how it all turns out. Again, Connor and I will have these games on Scarlet and Gray Sports Radio. I believe 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, and I think it will be 2 p.m. Eastern on the Saturday games as well. And actually, Friday is the NHL trade deadline too, so a lot of things will be going on, Connor. But I just want to give you the final thoughts on how this tournament's all going to play out, and can't wait to get up to the frigid temperatures in Minnesota. I know they've been dealing with a lot of snow.
It's Minnesota. When are they not dealing with a bunch of snow? The high temperature in the summer is like 50. It's gonna be a fun weekend, and especially it's gonna be a very electric environment, regardless who's playing. I mean, you can imagine in the event that it's like a Minnesota Duluth championship. It's all Minnesota. You're gonna have every fan is gonna want to come down from those because it's manageable for them compared to Ohio State fans who would have to drive up to Minnesota or fly up to Minnesota. Wisconsin is not even that bad, but yeah, it's gonna be a fun weekend. I can't wait to see how it's gonna turn out. He's got 4 very impressive teams, 4 teams that pulled off sweeps in their quarterfinal series, 4 teams that want to win. That's for sure.
And I know you were talking about Buckeye fans. I already know that some of them are driving up, which is great to hear. And we're excited to see how it all turns out in Minneapolis. Also, want to give a big shout out to our women's basketball crew. They will be having their call in Minnesota as well. We're traveling up with them, and that will also be on Scarlet and Gray SportsRadio.com as well. So a lot of Buckeye sports and a lot of great women's sports that will be taking place in Minnesota next weekend. Connor, thank you so much for coming on, and can't wait to get things going on Friday.
Of course, same here from my side.
Friday's game versus Minnesota Duluth will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, as well as Saturdays if the Buckeyes win on Friday. To follow SGSR, you can find us at sgsr.osu on Instagram and sgsr_OSU on Twitter, as well as going to our website at scarletandgraysportsradio.com. You can also check out our other podcasts by searching Scarlet and Gray Sports Radio on Spotify.